super excited for the third chapter of Women Builders. We started this journey about 5 to 6 months back, and it's been such a great learning experience personally for me, and we have been hearing great feedback from our community as well for people who are joining it for the first time. Let me just share a quick context. As part of the HBS club initiative, we realized that as a club we really wanted to play a small role in kicking off these conversations about how we can create a world which is more equal, and something that I am also very, very passionate about. And for today's conversation, I'm super excited to have someone I have personally looked up to, and I'm sure people who have joined today would echo the same. Vani, thank you so much for taking out the time. We can't thank you enough, and I am very, very looking forward to the conversation.
No need to thank. I'm glad to spend this time together and look forward to getting to know everyone here through their questions and comments.
Great. So, Vani doesn't need an introduction, but let me just share your journey, Vani. So, Vani is the managing director at Kalari Capital, an early stage venture capital firm based in Bangalore. She is a renowned investor and a visionary known for identifying emerging markets. Her leadership at Kalari centers around her commitment to the development of entrepreneurs and her conviction that Indian companies are poised to become global players. Vani is a technology-focused investor, with many of her investments having now become very successful, validating her aptitude for picking the best young minds and mentoring them to build high-growth companies. Some of Vani's notable venture capital successes include Dream11, CureFit, Snapdeal, Myntra, among others. Vani is profiled in numerous books, and she has identified as one of Fortune's most powerful women in business. There are a lot of awards and recognitions. We just kept it short for the introduction. She's actively involved in various organizations focused on fostering entrepreneurship and women leadership. Outside of work, Vani enjoys spending time with her family, practices yoga. And I have to say this, Vani, I saw your video on International Yoga Day, and it was so cool. And I truly love how you bring your authentic self as a leader. And if people haven't, you should definitely see. And it was great to see that you practice yoga every day. So that was something which I definitely wanted to share with the audience. And she believes in sustainable living and grows enough organic produce in her garden to meet her family's needs. So again, Vani, a very, very warm welcome, and thank you so much for sharing your time with us, and would love to deep dive into the conversation. So let me start with your journey, Vani, and as I was mentioning that I'm someone who's personally very inspired by your journey, because at some level I could relate to it. I grew up myself in a very middle class upbringing, and I truly believe the person I am today, it really is driven by the kind of influence I had, especially from my mother. I was raised by a single working mother, and her strength gave me the strength that I have today. So would love to know a little bit more about your upbringing, and especially the role that your parents played in shaping who you are today. And of course, please do touch upon your middle class upbringings, because I know those values have stayed with you till now.
I think the reason to have these conversations is so we draw inspiration from each other, and inspiration for all of us can come from many, many sources and needs to come from many, many sources. And I'll come to your question, but when you talked about inspiration, when I moved to Silicon Valley by almost accident or destiny, not by any big planning on my part, I don't think I knew how to spell entrepreneur, to put it mildly, and certainly didn't know anything about venture capital or any venture capitalists, right? But environments play a big role, inspiration plays a big role in who we become or choose to become, which I think sometimes we don't think about. And then it's important to think about how we pay that forward. And I remember attending this breakfast series where you just went, heard a speaker, grabbed some bagels and went on to work. So was way back before Cisco became as successful as it did. John Chambers was doing a talk, and he talked about his dyslexia, growing up in Virginia, not in core technology. And then, he was CEO of this huge technology company, right? And his life seemed so, simple that if he could do it, why not you? So the thing is to connect that dot to why can't I, right? Because I talk about this with my kids, with my team, with, when there is an opportunity. I think over years, what I've realized is, we build up many of our own constraints in our mind, and they become sort of the concrete walls, if you will. They feel unbreakable. But sometimes you have to turn on the switch to believe that it is possible, right? And so, and that could be anything. That could be, being an organic farmer, being an entrepreneur, being an athlete, being, being a playback singer. It doesn't really matter what that is, right? But the switch has to first go on in our head to truly have that core self-belief that you can, because you can't explain otherwise why you, Ahana, talked a little bit about your background. And, India is full of 1.5 billion people, largely middle class. And I, was born into one of those. And of course, when I remember, this is conversational, so I'm sort of a little bit rambling all over the map, but I remember the first day I landed in US at 21. It was probably the loneliest day of my life, because in India we are so surrounded with people who care and people who love, and to be alone, which I'd never really understood what that feels like until then, right? And I really realized how much I didn't know how lucky I was to have a supportive family, because we take everything we have as an entitlement and for granted and are right. But nothing is a right. Everything that's given to you is a gift, And so I think my middle class upbringing, a supportive family, parents who really valued my education and did everything possible for my education was a gift. And my parents had many quirks, which I think helped me today, if I think about it. Either because they couldn't afford it, or because, they believed in it. Actually, it was a little bit of both, but more the latter. I actually went to a school that was largely vernacular in Hyderabad, but what that did, and a girls' school, what that did was really build tremendous multidisciplinary skills. We had to do everything because the school had just girls, whether it was the drama club, the newsletter, the debating competitions, whatever it was. It didn't have any sports, unfortunately, but apart from that, there was this notion you can do anything, right? And there was nobody telling you you can't. And that's a very vulnerable age for women. And all of us, of course, are human, so we want to belong, we want to be liked. No one wants to stand out like the tall pole in the tent, as they say. And it takes a lot of building your own sense of self to be willing to walk your path and find your tribe, so to speak. But I think it was a very good grounding because there was a lot of, literature, a lot of reading, a lot of emphasis on communication, writing. And today, sometimes hire kids with, MBAs from big schools, and they can't write. And I'm like, well, that's a core skill. You need that, and I'm so glad for all of that grounding that happened at that time, and requirement to read a lot outside of our syllabus from, like I said, literature and so on and so forth. Humanities is such a missing part of our education unless you get lucky somehow. And I think we all need to be multidisciplinary in order to discover our full potential. And I was raised in a family where all of that was happening. In fact, there was more emphasis on all that than education. which was like, well, I mean, if you want to study, it's up to you what you make out of your life, right? But all the other things you're going to learn for sure, right? So studying was never really a pressure cooker at home. Nobody cared what grades I got or didn't get, or what I aspired to be or not. So in a way, that took out the pressure of trying to be something that somebody else has scripted for you. And you get lucky with a lot of people, right? And there was just a very supportive environment around me. I remember I had like failed in math, and there was this math teacher who I adored, and she said, well, you're better than this. Actually, I always expect you to be, maybe she didn't really mean it, but I took it seriously. She said, you could be first in the state or whatever. I mean, how do you say that to somebody who just failed math? But anyway, she did, and I wanted to prove her right. And I just got really good at math and started loving math. And that's what got me into engineering and technology and all of that. So people can play a role. And, as a venture capitalist, I think about, how to not kill somebody's spirit. We can do that unintentionally, perhaps sometimes, hopefully, because we should never do that intentionally. But, but if you can just believe in people's potential, right? The rest they will figure out themselves. So I think the middle class upbringing was both about using the fewer opportunities you had, because opportunities were not laid out in a buffet, right? And learning to value them. But also, I think really having something to prove in a very supportive environment. So we all work for beyond ourselves. So your better self comes out. I always tell my kids that if I didn't have them, I wouldn't be I'm a better human being because I had them, because there's somebody beyond yourself that you're trying to be someone for, right? So I think that was important. And the third thing is just common sense and pragmatism. And I think many times that has saved me from, making decisions that aren't grounded in long-term choices. Because in, my line of work, it's very easy to get distracted by the lure of the short term, and it's hard to keep yourself grounded, to think about doing the right thing for the long term for yourself and others, of course. So I think staying grounded, which was very much part of my family's ethos. I come from a South Indian family, and the thing I've always heard is don't let your head get too big, and of course, everything has a downside too. So then, even when someone tells you you're good at something, you sort of react by, no, not really, I mean, I see a lot of women do that, especially, and I always say, it's taken years for me to undo that training. You don't have to be arrogant, but you also don't have to sort of, diminish yourself. And sometimes women tend to do that more so than men, but it's a part of the ethos of culture, ingrained, if you will. But the negative things were about money, self-advocacy, thinking sometimes about yourself and not always about others, because these are also not ingrained in a average middle-class Indian family, especially for women. It's always about putting others first. And even sometimes when you don't agree, because that's culturally very ingrained, very much. And I always had a hard time asking my bosses for raises, because it was always do your work and so forth, right? And advocacy wasn't something that came very easily, because you just do what you have to do, and karma will take care of itself. And of course, if we go into philosophy and universality, maybe that is true, but you have to do your part also. So I think those are some of the things, maybe not exact answer to your question, but we sort of cover different ground.
No, I think this is a good segue to the conversation, Vani, and two things that I wanted to touch upon. I think you mentioned about the power of representation, and I think that's the foundation of why we also started this, because I'm sure people who are listening to your story and it's about the journey, where you started and where you are today. It will give a lot of confidence. And I strongly believe that stories are powerful, representation is powerful, and having a role model is powerful, because then you can actually believe that, okay, if you can do it, I can also. And honestly, this is needed when you have to break a lot of glass ceilings or maybe steel doors, as you mentioned. So you mentioned about, Vani, about doing the right thing, thinking about long term. Let me go back 2006, when you were having a very successful career in the US. You built businesses, you sold businesses, and then you took this decision that you wanted to come back to India and start what today is called Kalari Capital, in an environment where I actually don't know if there were any women-led funds or any women GPs. So where did you get that courage? And what were the challenges that you had to navigate from, again, your journey from a one-way ticket from US to India?
So, Ahana, I enjoy being a woman, all aspects of it. And even when I was in US, I never believed in a gray suit for myself, I mean, and I enjoy my color. I enjoy sort of elements of domesticity that truly are therapy for me. And all of that is there. But I don't necessarily think of my gender in the context of choices I make too much. Maybe I was really lucky. My dad, time and again, would say, my daughters can be anything. So having great dads is very important for girls. Of course, I don't have an answer for if you don't, then what do you do? I think we all have to overcome whatever life throws at us. But he would also always say, my daughter is more than what I could expect any son to be, right? So those kind of affirmations, right? So to me, I didn't ever see my gender as a handicap. That is not to say, people sometimes don't do things to make you conscious of your gender or think or expect less of you or whatever. But they don't matter to you as much if you don't let them get to you. So, which of course is universally true of anything in life, regardless of gender or otherwise. We all face situations. So the question is, how does it not get to you? And I feel that because I've had so much positive affirmation in my life from my family, from my husband, from my, father, who never thought I should be controlled. In fact, I remember this, I won't go into the whole story, but I was in this really difficult hike, and this uncle was telling Srini, my husband, why do you let her go to these things? He said, why, you think I can stop her? I mean, I won't try, right? So having a partner who lets you be who you want to be, and truly is proud of you, and, parents who are proud of you, that is 90% of what you need. They don't have to do something more for you, but just to say, I'm proud of you. I think that was a lottery, at least in my life. And I know that not everybody may have that. So any amount of wealth I could have born into, but that stereotyped or straight-jacketed me, how would that help me to become me? But you can get everything else on your own if somebody is giving you positive affirmation, and that I was very lucky, and we have to pass that on wherever we can. We don't know who needs it and how a small thing can make a big difference. But if we are mindful about giving people that positive affirmation, I think we can make this world a better place. But your point about 2006, how is this related to that? So to me, I don't make my decisions in the context of a gender, because that's not my problem. It is somebody else's problem if it bothers them, or if they misjudge or whatever it is. Why should that take up my energy or thinking time or space, right? And I also have a funny relationship with risk. I don't know, but I don't think too much about risk. Of course, it's not to say you take your retirement money and put it into cryptocurrency or whatever. No, I'm not talking about being stupid, right? But, but to me, risk is you have to think about risk from the context of consequences. What do I have to gain? What do I have to lose? Right? And sometimes the fear of facing what you have to lose is what allows you to take risk, or you do things only looking at the upside and never looking at what could go wrong. Our mind doesn't allow us to think what could go wrong. And, I think it's important to look at both sides in a very practical, pragmatic way. And I felt in 2006, rightly or wrongly, that I'd done a lot in the Valley, and whatever else I did further would be more of the same. And I like challenges. And I think, which is why I went to engineering school at 16. There were only, 7 girls in my class. And, so many seniors, including professors, would randomly stop for the first month or two and say, you took away job and, family support from a guy, right? And I'm like, I got my seat in merit. What's your problem? Right? But it would be not just these teenage boys between 18 and 22 or whatever who were our seniors, but so it was like hostile, really. Afterwards, of course, it all settled down and everybody matures. But imagine a college full of these young men who think that you have no right to be there, right? And this was a different time. And our labs would be sabotaged. It's really funny now when I think about it. It is, you laugh, but at that time you cringe. Or labs would be sabotaged, or, somebody will say you can't use this equipment or this or that or whatever it was. And all that settled down after the first year, but you had to survive the first year, right? So, but I think to me, this notion of being a minority got sorted when I was already 16, and I was 41 when I came back in 2006. So I think many years had gone by, many situations to have a tough skin to not think about.
I think engineering colleges in India definitely give this great experience for all women.
Well, I hope it's better now. I really do hope so. But, it was a good experience. It toughened me, and I don't think about it so much. You don't have to give me a seat at the table. I'll create my own table, and that's how about starting this firm. It's not easy for women to get to be GPs in funds if somebody had to hire me as a GP. But I don't need somebody to hire me. I can go create my own fund. That's sort of how I've always looked at it. If somebody had to make me a CEO, then I said, I can do more. I'm not going to get that opportunity in a conventional corporation. So let me go start my own company. That's sort of at least my wiring. We are all wired in a certain way. So rather than talk about why somebody isn't giving me opportunity that maybe I deserve or whatever, why don't I go create my own opportunity? Why should I waste the limited time? Life is short for all of us. You should do what makes you happy, and you should look for your own fulfillment and create your own path, right? That's at least the framework. So, but I, like challenges. I, create challenges in my life to push me outside of my comfort zone and to learn something new. Of course, when you are outside of your comfort zone, you increase the probability you fail. But what is the cost of that failure? You should think about that, right? And I said, if India doesn't work out, what do I lose, right? I mean, versus what do I gain in learning? And maybe I lose face. I lose, I don't know what I would lose really. I couldn't articulate what I would lose, but what I would gain would be so much more. So I know people ask me this question, how did you take these big risks? But they didn't feel like big risks to me, right?
Yeah.
So, so yeah, of course, failure is a possibility, but what would happen if I failed? No big deal, right? So I think oftentimes we don't allow us to be more because we are worried about failure, and we are not losing life or limb or anything, right? In this, So I didn't see it as such a big decision. I looked at it as, oh my God, India is so vibrant. I left in 85, and it was a very different India. 98% of my class hoped to get a job in a public service unit, because you get a job for life, you get a pension, right? And, when I came back in 2006, when I talked to kids at ISB, I was teaching a class, 98% of them said they wanted to work in a MNC. They didn't say they wanted to be an entrepreneur. Few years later, just a decade later, when I went into an MBA class and said, how many of you want to be entrepreneurs? That's 98%, right? So most of the class. So, you go from a world where everybody aspired to be in a PSU, which is such a intellectually, I hope I don't offend anybody, but it's intellectual death. What do you do? It's the same job, day in and day out, you get paid, but it can kill your innovation and all that you could be, right? And to wanting a job in an MNC, to saying, I will take risk and be an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
So I think for me, 2006, I was so kicked about the possibilities of India. I said, it's my loss if I don't come and, do something here that fulfills me, so I made the decision to come. And I am so glad when I look back that I made that decision, because I would have missed so much in my own development, in my own learning, right? If I hadn't. So to me, it doesn't feel like a big risk.
Got
or
it.
a big decision.
Got it. No, I think first of all, Vani, thank you for keeping this very, very candid. I think that's the intent of this room. And I would say, folks, keep sending your questions on the chat box, and we will keep on taking those questions. But I want to double click on something, Vani, you said. You said that you never let gender come into play when you were making decisions. But if you see the reality today, let's just take an example of the investing world. Around 2% of the funds went into women-led startups. Now, when you look at these stats, do you think that as a woman, you are an outlier and then you don't care what people perceive you, and you have a lot of inner conviction and you will still go and build, and other women don't have it? Do you see any difference in how men and women perceive risk in general, how men would pitch to you or a woman would pitch into you? Because the reality is there are fewer women. So is it a disadvantage world for them, or there are not enough women building and there is not enough funnel from the women's side? Where do you think, because you have actually seen this entire story, where do you think it lacks?
I think it's like all problems has multiple facets to it, okay? And the responsibility for solving for it probably lies in multiple levels. There is obviously a systemic issue, right? If only 2% of the funding has gone into women, you may be in a place to change the system. You may not be in a place to change the system. So then you have to ask yourself, what do I do, right? Now, for me, I think I tried to be the outlier and then figure out how the system works and how to make it work for me in my favor, right? And each of us here can do that. That is not to say, there was this young Dalit boy who became Ambedkar and wrote the Constitution. So why can't every person who's disadvantaged go do that, right? And let's keep oppressing or whatever. So it's not like you don't actually work on changing systematic, issues. You should, but you should also focus on creating self-actualization of your dreams, right? Because you may be dead and gone before the systems change, and you have to be part of the, process of changing systems. So I do think that in my case, like I said, I don't know, I was never uncomfortable in situations where, for example, when I went to raise capital first time without really knowing venture capitalists, whatever, we already had a company. I had bootstrapped it. We had customers, whatever. And I was pregnant with my second daughter. And I really didn't think much about it. That I didn't look at that as a handicap. I really didn't see it from, somebody else's eyes and I got rejections all over the place. And then until one venture capitalist said to me, you don't honestly expect us to fund a pregnant woman. And I was like, oh, okay. And I said, well, I'll come back and talk to you. This is only a few months, right? So at least it'll be over. So after, right? And in fact, I realized that I couldn't get funding in that state. And I didn't let that bother me, because why bother? Because I can't change the system. My daughter was born, and then I think 6 or 8 weeks later, we did get funded, right? And I didn't have an axe to grind against the world, because that would take up my energy, right? So biases do exist, but we have to think about how to overcome that, and especially for it to not be detractors to the extent possible, right? We also need to say, should there be a bias to fund a pregnant woman? So they're both questions are valid. You have to figure out which one do you work on, right? But having said that, I do think, see, there are communication, we human beings have, there's what is said and what is understood, are two different things, and culture systems play a role in that. So I think women do communicate many times differently than men do. Their networks, their access is usually more sparse than for men, and those become in this kind of a business where so much of it is on relationship and networks and trust and so many things. If you are an outsider, it is harder to break in, right? And that's inevitable. And in terms of communication, sometimes, we will have a women founder who has come in to pitch with the male co-founder, and in an hour, she probably wouldn't have said 2 sentences. Why would you put yourself in that place? Those are some things to think about, right? And the guys would almost never put themselves into that place. That will be sorted before you ever come to the pitch, right? What is my role? What's your role? How do we pitch? There's a rehearsal, whatever. If there are 2 co-founders, males, we see this all the time. And I'm like, why did she not even talk, right? Now, not that we can say that in that meeting, right? So, but this is not that uncommon at all. And even when sometimes they talk, there is a certain apologeticness to, well, why is your revenue this? Because we want to be conservative. What does that mean? Nobody funds you to be conservative. They want you to go conquer the world or whatever market you are conquering, right? So what is it that is the mismatch here? There is a mismatch of, this wavelength. It's like, tuning a radio or transistor or whatever. They are looking for this and you're talking like this. Those don't match, right? Why does it match for the guys? I don't know. Maybe there's more bro talk. Maybe there is sort of much more osmosis. I did this, I did that. That transfers as tribe knowledge.
Do you think it also has to do with social conditioning? And let me give you an example. I think I still remember there was a case that we did at Harvard. And there was this one personality, and people and all the students were supposed to describe that person. The same traits, and when it was a male, people said, oh, this is inspirational leader, we look up to, and all the positive things were said about it. As soon as that traits were described for a female, people started questioning, she's very aggressive, we don't like her, we don't want to work for her. So do you think that the way women behave, maybe in the room when they're pitching, is because of the years of social conditioning that has happened? And is the world, which is a boys' club, are they ready to deal with aggressive women? Because when you turn and become one, when you want to say, do they become uncomfortable? Like if I have to change the question,
maybe
and say,
they're not, but the thing is, remember, at the end of the day, success forgives all idiosyncrasies and cities and whatever, right? Now, of course, if it bothers you that somebody calls you aggressive or bitchy or this or that or whatever, you're not going to get very far, because you have to be so sure of yourself that what somebody has to say shouldn't matter. because your own judgment of why you do what you do should matter. Of course, you're human, so you'll have to figure out what are your support networks, but those are not this, right? You have to go somewhere else for your solace, and you can't find that in this channel, right?
Yeah.
But the question is, I can tell you money talks in the sense that if you have a product, if you have customers, if, all of this, you're loud, you're, aggressive, you're all that. Honestly, at the end of the day, people are making economic decisions. And the grade on that, maybe somebody gets a bigger sort of threshold of credibility, and you might get a lower. That's why, of course, it's oft that women have to work twice as hard or whatever it is. But so what, right? That's what you need to be prepared for, that you will get credit for what you have proven. You may not get credit for what you have not proven. You may not get enough credit for what you have not proven. But if you orient yourself to that mindset and, plan for it like that, then I think you will be fine. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, Vani, because sometimes, you tend to act like a victim. And you will say, no, it's a boys' club and we can't do it. I think I really love your perspective where you say that you just have to believe in yourself. You need to have so much self-belief, irrespective whatever people are saying. You just need to keep doing it. And I think that's also is the foundation of how you built your own journey. But coming back to the pitch room that you were talking about, where women are not speaking up. Of course, men have this ambition. They share that when they are pitching about their story. How can women leaders like you support them, bring this change and coach them and mentor them? And would love for you to maybe also share a little bit about what you are building with CXXO, because that is also one of the reasons, I'm assuming, why you started this initiative.
Yeah, I looked at it from, I probably have 10 productive years of working career. And I said, what are the things I want to do? I sort of go through every decade a self-reflection on what do I want next decade to be, and which was also what led to me coming back to India. And so the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, I think I kind of think in a decade, which is just how I operate. And then it takes out the pressure of the short-term success or failure, because there is something that requires a step-by-step, incremental add-on to get to sort of the larger goal of the decade, so to speak, right? So, a couple of goals for the decade for me, one of which is what can you do in your own small way to create a better, even level playing field. And I think the biggest thing is open people's mind to possibilities, pay forward, show the path, right? And support where support makes a difference, right? So that's all you can do. I don't think you can, systems change from grassroots. Most systematic change happens from, grassroots, and that's what you have to work towards making possible. So, we started CXXO with sort of the XX being a cute take on the XX chromosome, but representing sort of female power. And we'll see where it goes in a decade, and we can, reflect on what change and impact we created or not. But first is to allow for things to seem possible. So first is to create a community conversations, right, that allow people to build that network, that allow people to learn from each other and be a support network to each other. So that's one part. We also have a funding to fund female founders. Obviously, there are probably more female founders than we can fund. So we can only do a small part, but if you take that first step, maybe somebody takes the second or the third step, and hopefully more people will be more conscious at least about funding more women founders. So that's the second part of CXXO. And the third part is really about leadership development and growth, right? Because funding is only the first part. And, then the pyramid gets thinner and thinner and thinner in terms of having women in a place of power and leverage so that they can actually make the bigger changes and impacts, right? And they need to be in that place of leadership to do that. So CXXO goals are very simple. Let's build a thriving, supportive community. Let's do our share of funding some women. And then let's create conversations and programs for women leadership development. We recently launched one along with Harappa, selecting a cohort of 20 women who go through a 3-month process of finding their voice and going through the role playing so that they can think about how do they do their pitch, how do they undo some of their maybe unconscious conditioning, because oftentimes we are not thinking about it. If you can just get the awareness, then maybe, and then change is 30%, but awareness is the 70% of the problem, right? So those are some of the things we are doing with CXXO.
No, very interesting. And it's always great to see actions, because sometimes when you talk about this, it's more words than action. So it's great to see the work that you're doing, Vani. And we'll open up for questions, but one last question from my side. As you see these women come and you would see some transformation, were there a certain biases that you had which you didn't even realize? And as you are becoming more and more aware about this, would love to hear, because I can say that
in the context of women founders.
Yeah, as a women founder, that sometimes you might even have a bias against women which you don't even realize. Because, like, to give an example, I tried as for example, you said that while growing up you were very comfortable with the culture. When I was in IIT in a class of 628 girls, I tried really badly to fit in. So I would say, no, I'm not behaving like a girl. Why are you talking? Because all my friends were boys. Now I can say that it has taken me a decade to be an 100% authentic version of myself, but it has been a journey. And now I've realized the biases which even I had, and I wasn't even aware about it. So as you have seen this journey, were there any biases that you think you had?
Oh, I'm sure. I am 59 now, right? And so there's a journey of life to get to a certain maturity and certain comfort about yourself, and so on and so forth. So this is not my 20-year-old self, right? So I'm sure I had all the angst of every other 20-year-old. Maybe I had a little lesser or whatever, but it's not a zero-sum game, right? So, I think biases that would bother me a lot is a lot of times there would be innocuous comments. Oh, you travel so much, do you care about your children? Or, things like that, right? And then, but you learn that, you have to have a thick skin, because you are going to be judged. But does that judgment matter to you? You have to ask that question. And somebody is going to judge you all the time, no matter what you do. I mean, come on, you see a housewife, you automatically assume that she must not be that smart. I mean, don't we have that bias also, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, I was having this conversation with my daughter. She was saying something about, if the woman has never worked. And I said, listen, honey, if the woman hasn't worked, look at the level of bias you have against that woman, right?
Yeah.
Why do you assume that your grandmother didn't work and you loved your grandmother, and there are enough, people in the extended family that you love that don't work, and why do you diminish their contribution there? And she had to think about it, right? So, so either way, I think sometimes we have these biases, and it doesn't matter you're woman, men, whatever. And it's a journey of self-awareness for each of us to think about, what are my ingrained prejudices? And am I going to die with those many prejudices, right? So how do I work on myself? So I think that's important. But that's a self journey, but more on how we work on ourselves, not just about our prejudices, is more importantly, how do we deal with other people's prejudices, right? And I think women face it one way or the other, right? So currently we live in a world, which is a funny world, right? If any woman were to make a choice that I'm not going to work, right? She should have that right. But I do think she gets judged quite harshly for that, right? In certain circles, at least, right? And what about that then? or if a woman were to co-found a company with her husband, almost always she gets no credit. And I've seen this across the board. Even other women judge her to say, yeah, she got there just because of her husband, right? They don't see the real hard work and I've talked to many of those women, and it's almost like it's a double whammy, right? So they are misjudged for they're not given any credit for their contribution, but the husband gets all the credit, right? Which is why I never started anything with my husband. I said, I don't want to deal with this at home, let me keep home and work very, very separate, which I think was very smart and important decision that I made. So the key though is for each of us to learn to be very, very comfortable in our own self-belief and in our own self. And this is, again, of course, gender is a factor here, but it doesn't really matter. I think, whatever your gender is, to pursue our life and success, you have to be comfortable to walk your own path. We can't find something that isn't us if we are not comfortable with our own self.
No, absolutely. And very well said.
People ask me all the time, why do you not drink? I just don't. What has it got to do with it? I used to do enterprise sales in US, and the sales culture in US is so centered around taking customers.
Yeah, drinking.
Do this or whatever. But I did very well. So, I think if you are, and it doesn't mean I have to fit somebody's mold. It's not a moral or immoral thing. It's just, this is who I am, and why should I become somebody else?
No, absolutely. And I think, Ravi, you have a very similar question. So let me ask Ravi to come and ask the question directly to Vani. Khushbu, if you can help with that.
Sure. Vani, I'm a professor here in the US. I have another Indian professor colleague who's years back said that he decided he was not going to be discriminated against. And I thought it was an interesting way to approach the issue, because he said if you start thinking you're discriminated against, you find all kinds of reasons, and you don't do the things you can do.
Yeah.
Whereas if you rule out that possibility, you think everything is your fault, therefore you got to fix something in the way you approach. And I thought what you were suggesting on gender discrimination sounded very similar to characterization.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you will face some kind of discrimination or the other all the time, for the way you dress, for the way you look, for the way, you're born, or whatever it is, for your lack of English, or, any number of things. But, your attitude can go a long way. So I agree with you. Yeah. So kudos to your friend.
And kudos to you. Thanks.
Great. Let me also have Yogita, which has a very interesting question. So I'll let her ask that question. But apart from gender, she also wants to ask about the age. So Yogita, if you're there, please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, Ahana. Hi, Vani. Considering the age, life expectancy increasing, there are many people who are trying to do something new after they retire, or in between their career, at certain stage of their career, especially women. They want to quit their corporate job and they are trying to get into startup world. So my question is, like, what kind of biases or consideration, the factors you consider investing in those kind of ventures? And if you can share some examples with us of successful startups which are started by women over a certain age, that will be nice.
I mean, we all know Falguni, so I don't have to go very far with Naika, right? So I leave that as an example. But honestly, Yogita, young girls face far more bias than, maybe older women in so many ways, because what happens if she gets married? What happens if she has children? Will she be able to bring the same focus, energy if I invest into her and she decides not to work? And so I do think that no matter which age, whatever, they face that. And yes, well, by the way, it's not just gender. If you are a man and in your 50s starting a company, because that's not the norm that fits into a startup, maybe because you're perceived to be less aggressive, ability to take less risks, ability to sustain the risk for a longer period of time. You have probably financial responsibilities. There are many biases that come in. So if you look at, age, overall, regardless of gender, most of the funding goes to people, under 35. Very little funding goes to somebody over 50. Is that right? Is that fair? That's probably a different question and debate. But what I can tell you is, doesn't matter your age, if you really are able to convince and build something that shows that this has, immediacy and value, I think many biases will drop off. The question always is, when do you get that hall pass? When do you get that credit for things you haven't done yet? And I think the younger people get that more because they're supposed to be in tune with the technology more. They can sort of do a garage bootstrap. They are not expecting the kind of paycheck that probably somebody in their 40s and 50s need. I started my company in my late 20s, and for 2 years, I didn't take a salary, right? And I bootstrapped the company. I don't know if I could have done that if I was a guy, didn't have a paycheck of another spouse coming, and with children, home, mortgage, these are all real, right? They all play into people's minds to say, maybe you can do this for 6 months, but what if things don't work out in 6 months? Are you going to just leave this and go away? So whatever that situation is, you have to develop a sense of self-awareness to what are the reasons why somebody will say no. How do you role play for that for your own sake? Maybe you can't give more than 6 months of risk. You shouldn't start a company.
That's good.
Great. So we can take
I think there was a question from Amit. I saw that. Maybe it's a bit controversial. So let's take that on. Amit, what did you want to ask about urban ladder or whatever?
Thank you, Vani. And my question was more general around, since you invest in so many companies, there are so many startups after a decade of sacrifice, they still have to face a distress exit. It's happening now with lowering valuations. It happened post-COVID. And just what are your thoughts or advice around that?
So, Amit, the problem is we have a culture that assumes only success, okay, in everything we do. So mentally, as a founder, oftentimes, you're not ready to make the tough decisions when you need to make, right? If you're a doctor and you see somebody with gangrene and you actually need to amputate, but if you say maybe it'll go away, what do you think happens? Gangrene spreads, you have to cut more. The longer you wait, the more you have to cut. It's the same with startups. What would you call a doctor who sees gangrene and doesn't cut? Incompetent. That's really what happens, right? They can get sued for malpractice. It can't happen in a startup. So before distress, there is long list of signals. Distress does not happen overnight. And most likely there are people who have already spotted this a long time ago. You're not willing to listen. That's the problem, right? Because you can't separate your emotion to what you think you deserve or what you think is possible, the hope and the prayer, the 1% hope and the prayer, to make the difficult decisions. Yeah, okay, maybe there are, I don't know, miracles of gangrene disappearing overnight, but are you going to take the risk to let sepsis set in? Distress is sepsis. It didn't happen overnight. I can tell you every single case that I've been part of, there has been a year or more. There have probably been opportunities to salvage, but it isn't one mistake. Time and again, you ignore the signals. Okay. So life is not separate in a startup versus whatever, there are probably, many signs and you don't see it because you don't want to see it. Not even because people don't tell you, because there are smart people surrounding you, but you either don't let them tell you, or if they find a way to tell you, you try to shut them out or make them your enemy, right? Or you treat them like they are your enemy, right? So I see that movie play out again and again and again, right? So before you get to a distress sale, there has been many stages of potential salvage that you turned your back on until you hit that wall. You did not push the brakes, despite many chances. Every single situation, I can tell you that. And it's unfortunate because, if you play a sport, if you play whatever, right, you're not going to win every time. And you have to think about broader consequences. By my actions, my employees may be left all of a sudden who have placed trust in me with overnight, no salary to be paid. And we have seen enough of that. My suppliers who gave me credit, what happens to them? Do I have a right to think of only myself above and beyond everybody else that are part of supporting me, believing in me, trusting me, right? If we could inculcate more of that into whatever HBS curriculum, right? Teaching that understanding of acceptance of failure, right? Failure is just a step. What is failure really? I mean, nothing is ultimate, you come back. It doesn't matter, you're Dhoni or whoever, you lose a game. There is another game. But if you burn your team and burn yourself on a game you're going to lose, and you are not willing to take that loss, then, you get foolish on the field, right? Maybe you'll never play a game again.
Got it. And I appreciate the controversy. Thanks for addressing it, Vani.
No, I think this is very refreshing, Vani, just to keep it absolutely straight, and saying straight from your heart. If we can maybe take one last question, because I think it's very interesting, because I keep hearing this. We tend to put women into one mold and men into one mold and say women are better than this and then men are better at this. Maybe Mudit, if you want to ask that question, and would love to get your take on that, Vani. Do you really believe that?
Hello, I'm Mudit Jain I did my MBA at Wharton. My question, Vani ji, is that generally my belief is that women have better EQ than men. I see that in my wife also, in being able to suss situations at home and even outside. So would you think they make better managers and entrepreneurs, even though men are more dominant, but in terms of multitasking and kind of going beyond underneath the skin of the situation? Your comments, please. Thank you.
I wonder why women have more EQ than men. Is it because they're born that way, or they're conditioned?
No,
let me finish. Let me finish, please.
Yeah.
So I think it is social conditioning why you have that EQ. From home, from how you are raised, how you are given approbation, right? And I bring a glass of water after my dad comes home from work, let's say, that's almost expected. And Betty is nice to have a daughter at home. If you had a brother, I hardly wonder, if he even notices mom is so tired, so I think it's some of this is social conditioning about women having more EQ. I think it's forced into them or whatever. And especially somebody has to have the EQ in a partnership. If the other person doesn't, and then it's survival technique. I think they have more EQ because it's a survival technique. But, do they make better managers? I don't know. In the sense that sometimes your EQ is important, but maybe you don't make the tough decisions you should because you feel the other person's pain. And I think that was a cultural conditioning for me that I had to overcome. I remember the first time I had to let go of somebody because they were not performing, I I think not the first time, many times have gone into the bathroom to cry. I don't think guys go into bathroom to cry because they had to let go of somebody, because I could feel their pain. I'm like, how do they support their family? And, how do they, and, all of these things. And to Amit's question, if the guys thought more about it, maybe they don't get into a distress where until the last minute, they don't make the decisions they need to make, and they leave their employees without even a salary for 30 days, right? How did you get there? If you didn't know this business was going anywhere, why don't you pay all your employees 90 days salary and say, I am done, and be a man to close shop? They don't do that, right? Why? Time and again, we read this in the paper. And like I already said to Amit, there's a long story behind that for the people who were there in the room that doesn't get into ET news or something like that. But, the key though is EQ is very important because it teaches you empathy, but you have to balance that with knowing when, you can't take on the world's pain, right? So then you can't survive at all. So how do you make the decisions you need to make without letting everybody else's pain be your pain? But sometimes that's also hard to overcome as a conditioning. So I think there is both sides to the equation. Men need to maybe develop more EQ and understand other people's pain. And maybe women sometimes need to let go of the EQ to be able to make the decisions they need to make without having guilt. Women guilt themselves far more than men, and it is because they have EQ. Otherwise, where does the guilt come from? I always joke that it doesn't matter what part of the world I am in, I know exactly what is being served at home for lunch or breakfast or dinner, and everything has been lined up, and whatever task list, spreadsheets, whatever it is that it takes to do that. And the reverse with my spouse is definitely not true, right? And that's not to say, the world ought to work differently or whatever. But, do I need to guilt myself so much if everyone in the house didn't get that perfect breakfast? They're all adults. They should probably go grab it themselves, but I do, right? So, I think I would advise women to let go of your EQ and guilt a little bit because in trying to be a leader, you can't just make popular decisions. You will have to make tough decisions. And as long as you're doing them with the right intent and you're doing the best you can, stop guilting yourself. That's another big problem that I see for women growing in their career.
Thank you. Just to add to you, Dhirubhai Ambani had once said, I'm not the Mother Teresa of Indian business. Thank you.
That we all know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vani. As you can see in the comment section, everyone is saying thank you for keeping it very real, very candid. I think 2 takeaways personally for me. We talk about these biases, but now I think I really love the perspective that you provided. Just have the self-belief. Do not even bother about that. Keep building and do the right thing. I know this is a time where we have to put our head down and take those tough calls and tough decisions which are needed. So thank you so much for bringing that very honest, fresh perspective, Vani, and really appreciate you taking all the time. And thank you everyone for joining on a Thursday evening and for a very engaging conversation.
Thank you, Ahana, and glad to meet all of you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Good evening.